Hi everyone, it's Louise again from Life Through, and today I'm actually bringing you some information and some interesting context that I gathered from a film that I watched. So the film is called The Wisdom of Trauma. It was created by Science and Non-Duality, and it featured mostly Gabor Mate. Now, Gabor Mate has actually been around for quite a while. Sorry, I'm just bringing up his Wikipedia page. So if we look at his Wikipedia, so he's a Hungarian-Canadian physician and author. He has background in family practice and a special interest in childhood development and trauma, and in their potential lifelong impacts on physical and mental health, including autoimmune disease, cancer, and attention deficit disorder, hyperactivity. That's how we shortened it to ADHD, and addictions. So he has, you can look him up. He has done many things, and he has such a lovely repertoire of how he compassionately confronts the lingering trauma within people. And he actually goes through all of this in the film. Now, I did mention that this is a film by Science and Non-Duality. So if you go to their website, which is scienceandnonduality.com, you can actually watch the video for a donation of your choice. The standard is $15, so it's about 250 Rand, but they are willing to accept less. They're a lovely organization, and they actually do a lot in the way of bringing these types of people to the masses' attention. So it was a beautifully done film, and I would highly recommend anybody who's resonates with understanding the impact of trauma on our lives and how to deal with it. It's such a beautiful film. So I'm going to give you my context that I took out of it. Okay, so just in summary, he speaks about the widespread of unhealed trauma. They mention the adverse childhood events, the destructive impact on the person, the community, and the planet. And then he's such a loving, giving man. He always brings in the wisdom of trauma. So healing through community, healing through compassionate inquiry, and healing through the wisdom of trauma and choosing self, what he calls authenticity. Okay. So Gabor talks about the epidemic of unaddressed trauma, about how these traumatic events live inside of us as trauma imprints and responses. He explores the idea that the trauma extends past the event into our present as a lingering pain of unprocessed emotions. Gabor quotes, "Children don't get traumatized because they are hurt. Children get traumatized because they are alone with their hurt. As children, we lack the resources to process our pain and our rage. Without a stable adult guidance on how to process anger in a non-destructive way, these emotions then build up to an unacceptable level. And in order to avoid further isolation, the child will learn to suppress the rage and their emotions, rather than connecting to self. The child learns to dissociate or feel shame for their emotions, rather than learning on how to connect to themselves authentically. And they feel shame for having these emotions. Children internalize and self-blame when mistreated or neglected because they feel safer. It feels safer to protect a positive ideal of a parent than it does to accept that they aren't protecting you." So Gabor goes in the film and he speaks about how we go through these, children go through traumatic events, and it's not the event itself that is so traumatic, but it's the loneliness and the lacking and the lack of support that they have afterwards and actually processing it and understanding it. He says that is the lingering trauma as well. And he does make mention of how it's easier for the child who is in such a vulnerable state to be taught either to self-isolate or isolate their feelings or shut down their feelings because it's not considered socially acceptable, as well as turning the blame within themselves. Because if you're a young, vulnerable child, you don't have the resources to say, no, you're the problem. Because if the adult is the problem, then everything's in trouble. So it's easier for the child to say, I am the problem. I am shameful. I should not have these feelings. Gabor even reframes the idea that such shameful emotions, such as anger, fear, sadness, are actually useful messengers. Feelings that need to be felt and compassionately worked through as they are authentic. So it's not wrong that we have anger, but the question is, what can we learn from that anger? So there's nothing wrong with having it. It's something that's being asked to be addressed. The argument for healing these unprocessed emotions is because they block our ability to connect with ourselves. And if you're not connecting to yourself, you cannot be engaging the world fully present. If you can't even connect to yourself, how is yourself connecting with the outside world? Gabor says, underneath that traumatized persona is a healthy individual who has never found expression in this life. It is not a question of healing the trauma or even getting rid of the memories of what happened, but rather to help the person expand so there is space for those emotions. Trauma and its unhealed imprints often affect every moment through trauma responses. So the imprints of trauma that are left with us and unprocessed arrive today in our now time as trauma responses. These responses, the sense of vulnerability, of sensitivity, the need to be in control, feeling overwhelmed, exhausted, depressed, these are not choices, these are responses. In the film, they do feature other people. And there was a lady who runs a compassion prison project. She goes on to describe how adverse childhood events are a terrible event that continues to happen to the child. And the child has no control or knowing when this event is going to end, making the child hypervigilant and triggered into a stress response. This level of deregulation can impact the person's behavior and responses. And it's a very gentle way of looking at how deregulation of a child starts to grow with them and they become deregulated as an adult. But somehow in between that, without any guidance, this person was meant to just realize, oh no, that's not what I want to do. And so this implicit sort of thing of it's a choice if it still remains, which is not necessarily true because it's something that's ingrained within the person and their behavior. So adverse childhood events are stressful events occurring in childhood, which includes domestic violence, parental abandonment through separation or divorce, a parent with a mental health condition, being the victim of abuse, physical, sexual, and or emotional, being a victim of neglect, either physical or emotional, the member of the household being in prison, or growing up in a household in which the adults were experiencing alcohol and drug use problems. They say that if you have about 5 or more of what they call these ACEs, so these adverse childhood events, it gives you a disposition to certain behavior. As this information did come from a lady who was running a prison project, she has noticed that most prisoners actually have these experiences in their childhood. Gabor also speaks to addiction as an escape and a dissociation to help dull and suppress the pain. He defines addiction as any behavior that a person finds relief in the short term and craves, but suffers negative consequence and cannot give it up. He states that this could be the obvious, such as drugs, alcohol, nicotine, but then goes to list on the less obvious: sex, gambling, shopping, eating, the internet, gaming, work, relationships. When people think of addiction, they think of the bad addictions, because in our society, we've deemed what is good and bad addictions. So it's bad if you're taking drugs. You're a bad person, made bad choices. But if you're a workaholic, you've made good choices in life. So we tend to skew in society our definition of addiction and not looking at it as a behavior and the potential causes for it. Gabor reframes the search for the source of the addiction. So this is his quote. First issue is not why the addiction, but why the pain. So again, addressing that there is something driving this behavior and it's not the choice of the individual. Gabor links the trauma to unhealthy behavior by saying, are we free? Are we conscious? Are we making a decision based on our full awareness, or are we driven by subconscious dynamics that we've inherited or we've developed as a response to childhood trauma? He then goes on linking the remaining trauma response and the ways that it creates a stressful state within the person and therefore the impact on their health. Disease, so this is his quote, disease, whether mental or physical, are normal responses to abnormal circumstances. And what would be considered normal in this society is often actually insane. In the most health-obsessed society ever, all is not well. I love that Gabor then goes even deeper. He continues to connect our consumerism and destructive behaviors as trauma responses, saying that because we disconnect from self and body, we mirror that disconnection with Mother Nature. His quote goes, large segments of the economy survive because people buy things that give them temporary pleasure, but do them no good whatsoever in the long term. In fact, are even harmful. We're going so far as to destroy the earth because of our addiction. So he speaks to materialism and consumerism as a type of addiction. Gabor offers invitation to explore our trauma with compassion, always with the vision that every person is complete and whole, that they have the tools to heal, to be authentic and complete. And all that is needed is compassionate space to feel and heal. This is a quote from Gabor. I've learned that working with trauma can teach us so much wisdom and can reveal the beauty of our existence that because of trauma, we lost sight of. Another quote, trauma involves a lifelong pushing down, a tremendous expenditure of energy into not feeling the pain. As we heal, that same energy is liberated for life and for being in the present, so that the energy of trauma can be transformed into the energy of life. That lady who does the prison project, she goes on to say, we heal in community. She said that because in her group circles with prison inmates, she observed when someone can acknowledge the pain within themselves, but also in the pain in the people around them, this creates a space for shift. And her quote is, it takes the othering out. It actually brings the human in. And we start seeing each other for what happened to us and not what is wrong with us. In this film, Gabor does talk about the healing powers of this psychedelic modality, saying that the therapeutic potential of psychedelics is that it silences the conditioned mind so that people can access two levels of realization. One, the deep trauma and the pain that they experience and still carrying, so they can face that dragon. The second is, and in the right safe context, and with compassion, that person can experience these emotions and mind states without being driven to insanity or escape. So his warning is, if you do use psychedelics, it must be accompanied with an adept therapy and support, because you need that space for holding. You're not meant to be the lonely child that processes all their feelings by themselves. You're meant to start finding that vulnerability in accepting support from others and help from others. So if you do go into psychedelics, make sure that you are supported. Make sure that your intention is to be therapeutic and not an escape. The other guidance towards healing is how we engage and hold space for each other. And he has a technique called compassionate inquiry. He goes on to explain the essence of which is the belief that the truth is inside all of us. We just have to ask the right questions to help people arrive at the truth. In this approach, Gabor challenges people towards the truth, not as a scary experience, but as a liberating one. Asking clients, he did have this one session where he asked a client to imagine radically that her depression was not a failure, but a success. It was a success in allowing her to feel her authentic emotions. And that was very freeing to her. The imprints impact how we interact with each other and perceive each other. It's common for all of us to get angry or frustrated with others. Gabor shows that the source of this frustration is linked to a deeper experience, and once liberated, can be released. The possibility is that liberating the possibility is the liberating possibility of healing. Healing to better connect, to be with ourselves, to understand our behaviors, and how we choose to show up in this world. By working through imprints and responses, you can then start having choice as to how you react to situations, giving space for overwhelming panic of reactions to an authentic response. What I meant by that is by being compassionate with yourself and allowing yourself space to genuinely feel your emotions, rather when you start feeling your emotions becoming overwhelmed with panic because you've been taught that these emotions are shameful and they should be pushed down, rather being authentic and understanding your response. Gabor says that what trauma is, we don't respond to the present moment, we respond to our past. And that is the beauty of healing, that when you reframe things and you actually see the source within ourselves, then all of a sudden that is liberating. If you see you are the source, now you are powerful. And that's where I'll leave my review of that film. I really think that if anybody can, and there is also options if organizations want to host screenings, they do offer this. Like I said, please go visit the website. It's a beautiful film. And for anybody who's on the healing journey, wants to assist people on the healing journey, I would highly recommend this film. And I hope you've enjoyed my review of it. Until next time.